Hey, what's up, y'all? It's Nathan back with another video for you today. The next episode of Power Surge, our 2025 NFL Power Ranking Series. Today, we're going to be talking about our 30th ranked New Orleans Saints. Now, this is a team that has gone through a lot of changes since last season. So it's going to be a super, super exciting team to go ahead and break down. So let's just go ahead and get straight into it. So first off, we're going to be talking about their 2024 season. In order to know where we're going, I think it's very, very important to contextualize last season for us to kind of understand how we got into this position in the first place. So last year they went 5-12 straight up, while going 7-10 against the spread. All five of those wins and five of those times they covered the spread was when Derek Carr was their quarterback. Because he missed significant time, they actually ended up finishing 32nd in points per game and 21st in yards per game. So it was really like a Jekyll and Hyde situation for when Derek Carr was in versus when he was out. Because he actually had a really good year when he was healthy. He was QB4 according to PFF. So he was super, super productive. So yeah, when he was in there, I mean, they lost a game against the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles by 3 points. They went into KC and were competitive until they got knocked out. They had a couple close wins, and then obviously the games against Carolina and Dallas to start off the season, where they almost put 50 on both of those teams in back-to-back weeks. So when he was in there, the Saints' offense was humming. With Clint Kubiak as their offensive coordinator, it was going well. Then when he was not there, between Spencer Rattler and Jake Hayner, this offense was just not an NFL caliber offense. It just straight up wasn't. And so I think that in a way hurt the defense. Granted, the defense was just not very good overall, anyways, because they finished 24th in points per game and 30th in yards per game. And so, because of how this defense was performing, the offense struggled without Derek Carr. This game ended up losing 4 games straight to end their season, as well as they moved on from their head coach, Dennis Allen. So, this 2024 season definitely a season to forget, which is really unfortunate because it started off with a lot of promise. So now let's go ahead and talk about their offseason. And so there's three, I think, really important pieces that we need to discuss about this offseason. First one is they bring in Kellen Moore as their head coach, basically their offensive coordinator. And I do think that is going to be a step up from Clint Kubiak. However, it is going to be interesting to kind of see what he can do without the super, super loaded Eagles offense. Because when he was in Dallas, he kind of got scapegoated. And then we went to LA with the Chargers. They were not, anything spectacular. So it's going to be really interesting to see if Kellen Moore is really one of these elite offensive minds, or maybe he just got overvalued because he was young and had a super, super stacked offensive roster. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see what happens there. And then another big talking point of this team is Derek Carr decided to retire due to his shoulder injury, and that's really going to hurt the floor of this team. Derek Carr is one of the best 16-ish quarterbacks in the league. And so when you lose a true, legit, good starter, I know everybody loves to meme Derek Carr, but he's still a good, legit starting quarterback. So when you don't have that, you're just going to have a much lower floor, really, to start off with. And that's really unfortunate because I do think that's also changing their game plan with Tyler Shook, who I don't think they were ready to start quite right away. But now it's kind of, let's see if he can figure it out on the fly, which I think I'm a little bit worried about. They also bring in Devin Neal, Brandon Cooks, and Dylan Radunes. Not expecting a whole lot of production between those three. But Kelvin Banks should hopefully be a pillar of this offensive line and a really good pass protecting tackle for them for a while. He has the potential to be a true elite pass blocker. They're also saying hello back to Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, and Eric McCoy. Between the three of them, they missed a good chunk of time last season. So getting 3+ starters on your team back is always going to help. Another important loss is Ryan Ramczyk's retired. So that's two big retirees from this offense. And then they're also saying goodbye to Jamal Williams, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Lucas Patrick, and Connor McGovern. So a couple decent players there, but mainly Derek Carr and Ryan Ramczyk are really the two big pieces that they're saying goodbye to because of their retirement. Now, when we talk about the defense, this is where I start getting worried. So they bring in Brandon Staley to be their defensive coordinator. And with all due respect, why in the hell is he your defensive coordinator? Brandon Staley, outside of having Aaron Donald on his team, has not had a good defense. As a defensive guy, when your side of the ball is struggling, then there are serious issues at hand. So I think he's really going to limit how good this defense could be, especially when they lose pieces like Peyton Turner, Willie Gay, Paulson Adebo, Will Harris, who are all kind of decent starters for them. Marshawn Lattimore, they traded away last year, so not like Brandon Staley had him to really work with. But then Tyrann Mathieu also retires as well. So that's three big retirees from the Saints team. That's going to hurt the overall floor of the entire unit. On the bright side, they did bring in some decent pieces. Devon Godshaw, Vernon Broughton, Danny Stutzman, Isaac Yadam, Quincy Riley, Justin Reed, Julian Blackman, and Jonas Sanker. So they did do a good job of bringing in some more talent, but are they going to be able to step up quite to the same level as some of the pieces they lost? To be determined. So now when we go ahead and recap this offseason, I do think there is legit excitement for Kellen Moore and what this offense could look like. Why Brandon Staley? Is there really no one else they could have hired to be their defensive coordinator? Whatever. Moving on, I do think the retirements are really going to hurt the floor of this team. That is 3+ stars they're saying bye to, just retiring and straight up vanishing. So I think that is unfortunately going to hurt this team. But I am still excited for this offense and what it could look like. But I am very, very worried about how this defense is going to shape up, especially with the coaching at hand. So now let's go ahead and actually break down these units more specifically. We're going to start off with the offense. So Tyler Shough, I want to like him. I really do. He has some fun highlights. But my issue with him is I feel like he's just too much of a headhunter. And while I think he was a guy that probably needed to come in and sit for a little bit and kind of learn, kind of play within more of the structure of the offense, I'm worried that he's going to come in, be too much of a gunslinger, and ultimately play himself out of the league. You know, he was a former 4-star recruit. He's had good athleticism, has a good arm. So I do think there's potential for him to be a good quarterback. I'm not ruling that out. He kind of reminds me of like a Bo Nix, kind of Joe Burrow hybrid, kind of somewhere in between them. I think it's probably what his ceiling is. I just don't trust. I don't trust between the ears enough for him to say that's what he's going to end up becoming. I think he's going to have almost like a Carson Wentz, Jameis Winston, even like a Spencer Rattler, where they kind of just do too much, can't get rid of the ball, and ultimately make a lot of mistakes. Then when you talk about Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener, neither of those guys are NFL starting caliber players. So you do have one of the three worst quarterback rooms in the entire league. There's no other way around it. That's part of the reason why this team is so low. Which, when you look at the other two teams we've talked about, the Browns and the Jets, as I said, three quarterback rooms that I think are really bad. So if you're noticing a trend here, if you don't have good quarterback play, you're probably going to be a pretty crappy team. But now, as we talk about the playmakers, I do think there is some excitement for them, also some worry. I think there's a very polarizing array of outcomes that could really happen for this group. So starting off with Chris Olave, missed a lot of time due to concussion issues last year. Is a very, very talented wide receiver when he's out there, but I don't know if he's a legit, true elite wide receiver one. I think he's almost like a Michael Pittman, Mike Evans, where he's kind of like a Batman, Robinson. Like he kind of needs a running mate, but he's able to win to all levels and has good speed. But who knows if we're even going to have a full season of Chris Olave? But when he's out there, fantastic player, and I think will produce. Just the him being out there is the big question mark. Brandon Cooks seems to be slowing down, so at his age, what he's going to provide, not super sure on that. Rashid Shaheed, he's a super fun player to watch. You know, every time he touches the ball, he really has the potential to score, but I think he's more of kind of a gadget deep threat guy. So I don't know if he's going to really blossom to like a Tyreek Hill, kind of like a true burner that can be super productive as a wide receiver one. So I do think he is a fun, solid player, not necessarily expecting him to be uber productive. And then Cedric Wilson at this point in his career is kind of just a solid wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5. kind of just very okay at everything. The tight end group is pretty exciting though. Juwan Johnson is a real kind of good wing tight end, like a real, basically a receiver, is what he is. And then they have Foster Moreau to be kind of more the traditional tight end, block, chain mover. Not super, super high upside, but a solid player who can get the job done. And then Taysom Hill, I think, in this Kellen Moore offense, could be a lot of fun. I think there's a lot of different ways they could use him, whether it's a wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, running back. Like, I do think there is a lot of options for Taysom Hill. I think Kellen Moore can get super creative with him. And then the running back room, Alvin Kamara, Kendra Miller, Devin Neal. It doesn't really matter. This is Alvin Kamara's running back room. I really don't see the other two guys stealing a whole lot of touches from him. And he's still a good running back. I think he has clearly lost a step. So I don't think he quite has the breakaway speed or the ability to break tackles quite like he did a couple of years ago. But overall, I still think he's a plus running back who's going to be productive and still demand most of the carries for this team. And then I do think this offensive line will shape up into a decent group, starting with their first round pick, Kelvin Banks. I think has potential to come in right away and be a very solid pass protector. And you're hoping that eventually he'll kind of develop into an elite guy to protect that blind side. And then Tolius Fuaga, kicking him back over to right tackle, where hopefully he should be able to get more comfortable and to start mauling dudes in the run game. Eric McCoy is one of the better centers in the league. Hopefully he can keep up the play that he'd kind of shown, but coming off injury, who knows kind of what we're going to get from him. And then Cesar Ruiz, just kind of a solid above average starter. Nothing super spectacular to write home about, but wins more often than he loses. The big sore spot of this offensive line is going to be left guard. Between Trevor Penning and Dylan Raduns, neither of them have really kind of panned out how you kind of want. But if you throw both of them at this, maybe one of them can at least be a solid starter. I think Trevor Penning is currently listed as the starter on our lads, so I imagine he'll start. Who knows if he'll keep that starting job? But either way, they'll give you okay guard play and hopefully just not be a liability. Then Will Clapp, another additional piece on the offensive line. So overall, not a super deep group, but if everybody stays healthy, I think could shape up into a pretty decent offensive line. So now as we transition to this defense, here's where I kind of start getting really worried because they have arguably the weakest defensive line in the league, paired with Brandon Staley, who does not like to put more than four guys out there and do any of the creative stuff. I think could really get exposed and have a really bad year. So starting on the edge, Chase Young is probably their best player, but he just has never reached the heights that he was drafted at. Almost just like another Jadeveon Clowney clone. Okay at getting after the quarterback, okay at stopping the run, but not quite elite like he once had the potential to. And do I expect him to finally figure it out this year at this point in his career? No, I don't. Cameron Jordan, future Hall of Famer, but at this point in his age 52 season, I just don't think he's a very good player anymore. I think, Father Time has ultimately won the battle there. Carl Granderson is going to play a lot for this team. He's a solid run defender, not particularly great at getting after the quarterback, but he's still at least a plus starter. And then I guess Chris Rumpf is the next guy who's going to get playing time. Maybe he can get after the quarterback, but I'm not expecting much from him either. So you have a rotation of like 2.5. Not great. Then we start talking about the interior, though. They do have some decent pieces here with Devon Godshaw, Brian Bresee, Nathan Shepard, Kalen Saunders, and Jonathan Bullard. So a couple decent rotational pieces. Brian Bresee is the guy who has the most upside. Hopefully, after a kind of rookie season, he'll be able to figure it out and really start teeing off on offensive lines and getting after the quarterback. But overall, it's a bunch of okay guys. But when you pair with Brandon Staley's coaching, I think this is going to shape up to be a treacherous defensive line. Having a really good D-line is how you win games and win Super Bowls. Just look at Eagles last season, or 2017 when they won their other ring. It's a very, very easy recipe to follow. Stack your defensive line, wins will come in too. So even if their D-line is weak, they probably do have one of the best linebacking groups in the league. Demario Davis is one of the top handful of linebackers. If he can still go, he is getting up there in age. He hasn't slowed down yet, so I'm not necessarily saying that he's going to or predicting that, But obviously, the older you get, the more and more likely that fall off is going to happen. But if he's still able to go, it's going to be a great unit because Pete Warner is also just a really solid linebacker. He'd probably be the linebacker one on a good chunk of teams in the league. So if Demario Davis is able to go, this is going to be one of the top handful of linebacking rooms really in the league. But now, as we start talking about this secondary, again, another spot where I'm worried because Brandon Staley is just going to have everybody sit back, play quarters, and not really do anything super smart or creative. And so, you pair that with a bunch of okay guys, I think his secondary is really going to get picked apart. Justin Reed is by far your best player, and he's a good safety. Like, don't get me wrong, he is a talented safety, but in no way do you want him to be the best player on your secondary. If he was maybe your second or third best player on your secondary, you'd feel good with that. But as your best player, that's a little bit worrisome. The cornerback room, Kool-Aid McKinstry, I do think has decent potential to really kind of start figuring things out and kind of keep growing into probably your best corner. But again, with Brendan Staley as your coach, I don't know if I really believe in that happening. And then Alante Taylor, Isaac Yada, and Quincy Riley. Between those three, one of them will be a solid slot corner, probably Alante Taylor, and maybe Isaac Yadam can figure it out on the outside. Either way, he's going to be okay. Alante Taylor, Kool-Aid McKinstry, they're all going to be okay, but not necessarily going to be going out there and winning games for this team. And then Julian Blackmon's been a solid safety, but again, he's kind of just one of these above average and not super spectacular players. And then Jordan Howden and Jonas Sanker, who knows how much they'll play, but not going to be anything super, super exciting there either. So overall for this defense, I'm worried about the front end and I'm worried about the back end. That's not really how you have a good recipe for a good defense, especially when you pair with the worst coaching in the league. I've I see no way in which this isn't the worst defense in the league when we come to the end of the season. But now I'm going to welcome you to the Fantasy Control Room. This is where we begin discussing all things fantasy football. First off, we're going to be talking about Chris Olave. So his current ADP in PPR leagues is wide receiver 35. So I think at this point in the draft, I do think this is good upside and good value for the position. Personally, it's probably not someone I'm going to target with the quarterback room being a little bit scary and his injury history. I don't know if he's going to have the potential to kind of be a true wide receiver one in fantasy. Olave is a player that I'm going to let someone else draft, but I do think it's a decent swing at upside. So if you already have a couple solid wide receivers, I think taking a flyer on him doesn't hurt. If you're relying on him to be a wide receiver one or two for your fantasy team, then I start getting scared. But around this point, I'd probably target Debo, Stephon Diggs, or Jacoby Myers over him. I think their ceiling is maybe even higher, but definitely have a safer floor because I'm not quite worried about injuries the same way as I am for Olave potentially. Now, next, we're going to be talking about Alvin Kamara. So, like I said, I think he's lost a step, but he's going to be really the main back in this running back room. So his value is kind of hard to gauge. Because he's lost a step, I'm not sure how I feel about him as a rushing threat. I don't think he's going to get, like 1,500 rushing yards or anything super crazy. So I think a lot of his value is going to come from receptions. However, the reason I'm worried is Derek Carr was so good at taking the check down. That's why Alvin Kamara had that one game where he had like 14 catches or something ridiculous. Where I'm worried between, Hayner, Rattler, and Shook that they're going to be too busy throwing the ball to the other team or, headhunting, trying to make big plays. Or I don't think he's going to get all of the dump down targets like he might have gotten in the past. So because of that, I'm scared to touch Alvin Kamara. I'm going to try to avoid him. Some other players I'd rather target at this range is like Chase Brown, James Conner, or even the rookie RJ Harvey. I think I trust their offenses more. I think I trust them as players, honestly, a little bit more. I think RJ Harvey, I don't trust as more. I think he's more of a high upside pick. But at least the other two, I trust them to be more productive for fantasy football's sake. So now, as you kind of start talking about the other players, Tyler Shook, I do think he's a fun upside pick. I do think this offense has decent upside, but he's a backup quarterback option for you. You're not really expecting him to start. Maybe have a couple good weeks, but I wouldn't draft him. Between Kendre Miller, Brandon Cooks, and Rashid Shaheed, I'm really not drafting any of these guys. Kendre Miller is just a bad player. Stop drafting bad football players in your fantasy drafts. Brandon Cooks, super, super late, has value to be a low end flex player, but still, I'm not really touching him. And Rashid Shaheed, I think, is a really good player, but don't draft him. Stop drafting deep threats. Gabe Davis, MVS, Rashid Shaheed, these guys who are just deep threats, don't draft him. It's always going to be a nightmare of, do I play him this week? Do I not? Do they get 20 points? Do they get 3? Who knows? So don't draft him. Do not draft him. He is a waiver wire pickup if you have a bunch of injuries and you get super desperate and you're hoping he gets a 50-yard touchdown. But as for that, don't touch him. And then Taysom Hill, tight end 30, he's always going to have potential fantasy value. He'll have a couple weeks where he explodes. But maybe with some of the issues in this quarterback room, I do think there is potential for him to have more fantasy relevance. So I do think this team has a couple players that will just have fantasy relevance overall, but I'm not really betting on any of the players in this unit are really just overall for this team. So now as we begin to discuss their schedule, I think it's an interesting schedule. It's definitely not quite as difficult of a schedule as the other two teams we've talked about so far in the series. So they open up with two straight home games against the Cardinals and the Niners. Then they go on the road to Seattle. So that's 3 NFC West teams to start off their season. Those are 3 decent teams. I think they're probably going to steal this one against Arizona. That's honestly a pick that I've been feeling in my gut. So I think they're going to steal this one against Arizona. But then I think you're probably looking at 3 straight losses with the Niners, Seahawks, and Bills. But I do think the game against the Giants at home is super, super winnable. I lean in New England in week 6. I think Chicago is probably going to take that. They'll lose to Tampa, lose to the Rams. So starting off your schedule, I think we're probably looking at 2 wins. And then you go to Carolina during week 10. Maybe you could steal that divisional game. Not really counting on it. And then they have their bye week. After the bye week, their schedule actually isn't horrible. They have to go on the road to Miami, on the road to Tampa Bay. Who knows what Miami's going to be looking like towards the end of the season. But then Tampa Bay, I think Tampa Bay is really good. They're going to lose. I think week 15, home against Carolina, home against the Jets, two super winnable games there. Having to go on the road to Tennessee. I feel like I'd rather play Tennessee early in the year as opposed to later because Cam Ward, I think, 17 weeks in will feel a little more comfortable. And then he finished at Atlanta. So over-unders at 5.5. I do think their ceiling is probably close to about like 6-11. I think it's their absolute ceiling. So there's a potential hit that over, but I think their floor is probably around 3 wins, 14 losses. So I'm probably personally predicting probably about 4 wins is what we can expect for the Saints, maybe 5. So when we get to the cover story, where we start talking all things sports betting, when we talk about their over-under, I'm leaning the under, I'm betting the under. There is a potential where they go over, but I think that's an absolute best case scenario, which I just don't see happening. So now when we talk about their odds to win the division, make the playoffs, or win the Super Bowl, there's absolutely no value. You might as well just go set your money on fire if you bet on either of those bets. Now we start talking about player props, though. I do think there's actually some good value here. As I said, Alvin Kamara, I think, is going to be the true workhorse back. Not really worried about the rushing touchdowns being vultured like I may about other quarterbacks in running back duos. So I think Alvin Kamara over 4.5 rushing touchdowns is tremendous value. I do think he'll be more productive than that. And then Chris Olave over 3.5 touchdowns. I also think he's going to be more productive than that. Granted, there's a big asterisk if he's healthy or not, but Chris Olave, one of those guys who hasn't been able to have quite the touchdown production because Derek Carr is notoriously the worst red zone quarterback in the league. So getting rid of a quarterback who struggles in the red zone, and we're just expecting this with Tyler Shook, we don't really know. But I do think he's going to be a little bit better as they kind of get closer to the end zone. So I do think Chris Olave will be able to get at least to 4 touchdowns. I am betting on the Rashid Shaheed under of 724.5 receiving yards. Again, I like the player. I think he's super, super fun and has really good talent. But because of his archetype, his role, I just don't expect him to go over that. And an offense where I'm just a little bit worried about the prolific passing I don't think it's going to be super prolific, so I don't think he's going to produce a whole lot. So that is what I'm betting on. So now let's get to the Scorch Report. So now welcome you to the Scorch Report. This is where we give our hottest takes of the season. And right now we're going to be talking about Tyler Shook. Listen, I'm not rooting for anybody to not succeed, but I don't think Tyler Shook is going to make it. I just really don't. Their offensive coordinator that they brought in, Doug Nussmeier, yeah, you might recognize that name if you're a New Orleans fan or LSU fan, is the father of Garrett Nussmeier, current LSU starting quarterback, who's projected to be a first-round pick. So I think when we're sitting there at the end of the season, Tyler Shook, second-round pick, I think this guy's not going to play very well. So now you start thinking, huh, do I draft my offensive coordinator's son to replace Tyler Shook, who maybe didn't play very well? Just saying, calling my shot, you know, the home, staying in Louisiana, gonna go play for his dad. A guy who, when I do see some Jalen Hurts-esque traits. I think that is just a super, super obvious recipe and obvious story that's just waiting to happen. So I think we're going to have one fun season of Tyler Shook. And the next season, we'll be talking about Garrett Nussmeier as the starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. That is what my hot take is for this team. So, with that being said, that is everything. That is my breakdown and predictions for this New Orleans Saints. Go ahead and drop down in the comments below if you think I'm too high, if you think I'm too low, if I'm a complete freaking idiot. Go ahead and let me know below. If you like this video, please go ahead and like and subscribe down below. We got about 29 more videos to make before the season starts in about 30 days. So there's going to be a lot of content coming forward for you in the next couple of weeks. So if you want to be a part of that, just go ahead and subscribe and stick around. Thanks, y'all.